This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets.
The oil market appears to be telling Saudi Arabia that its shift to pumping more oil after 5 years of cutting output was well-timed. The kingdom has in recent weeks pushed fellow OPEC Plus members to produce more oil despite fears about an economic slowdown, a marked change in policy that helped oil prices settle at a 4-year low on Monday. But despite OPEC Plus agreeing to raise output by a cumulative near 1 million barrels per day between April and June, the oil market is still reflecting a perception of tight supply over the next few months of peak summer demand.
U.S. crude stocks and distillate inventories fell last week, while jet fuel demand rose to a 5-year high, the Energy Information Administration, EIA, said on Wednesday. Gasoline inventories rose, stoking concerns among analysts of weak demand ahead of a major driving holiday in the U.S. later this month. Crude inventories fell by 2 million barrels to 438.4 million barrels last week, the EIA said, compared with analysts' expectations in a Reuters poll for 833,000 barrel draw.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
Solar panel makers in Laos and Indonesia, mostly owned by Chinese firms, boosted their share in the U.S. market after steep tariffs hit exports from other Southeast Asian countries including Cambodia and Thailand, trade data showed. The U.S. government finalized steep levies on imports of solar cells and modules from Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand and Cambodia in April, following 2 rounds of tariffs in June and November last year, to prevent dumping by mostly Chinese-owned factories in these countries. However, Chinese companies have moved their production to Indonesia and Laos and boosted exports to the United States, Reuters reporting showed.
Slovakia and Hungary on Wednesday condemned European Commission plans to phase out Russian gas and other energy imports, deepening a rift with Brussels over relations with Moscow. The EU executive had said on Tuesday it would propose legal measures next month to phase out EU imports of Russian gas and liquefied natural gas by the end of 2027. The plans also touch on oil and include trade measures targeting Russian-enriched uranium for nuclear power that would amount to a tax or levy on imports. Next, we have the top news in metal markets. China's steel exports are set to slump in the second quarter, threatening to exacerbate a supply glut at home, analysts and traders said, as the trade war and a wave of protectionism moving in its wake crimps export markets. Second quarter shipments from the world's largest steel producer and exporter are forecast to fall by up to a fifth from the first quarter, said 8 analysts and traders, who also expect exports to worsen further later in the year. That would also leave second quarter shipments lower than in the same period in 2024.
Prices of iron ore futures dropped on Thursday as traders weighed fears of weakening demand from top consumer China and the potential impact of upcoming Sino-US talks on trade tariffs. The most traded September iron ore contract on China's Dalian Commodity Exchange ended morning trade 2.17% lower at 697 yuan and 50 fen, $96.43, a metric ton. The benchmark June iron ore on the Singapore Exchange lost 1.19% to $97.15 a ton, as of 0318 GMT.
We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector.
Chicago soybean and wheat futures gained on Thursday after U.S. President Donald Trump hinted at a potential trade deal with an unspecified country, while upcoming U.S.-China talks in Switzerland also boosted investor sentiment. The most active soybean contract on the Chicago Board of Trade rose 0.19% to $10.41 a bushel by 0427 GMT, recovering from 3 days of losses. Wheat climbed 0.23% to $5.36 a bushel. Trump said late on Wednesday that he would announce details about a major trade deal with representatives of a big and highly respected country. The New York Times reported that the deal is with Britain. That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.